case, let me start again.
Check out that segue. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Jenny List.
This is episode 345, a stunning lightsaber, 2 extreme cameras, and wrangling Roombas. This week in Hackaday news, we finished up the component abuse challenge on Tuesday. Our judges are hard at work judging the entries. I got the forms out to them, right?
I think you did.
Jenny's actually one of our judges.
I wasn't sure if I could admit that on the podcast.
Yeah, did I just throw you under the bus on this one? So if you don't like the way you ranked in this one, just come get Jenny.
Damn.
We actually have 6 judges, so Jenny is one of a team of many.
I would like to say that I have been deeply impressed with the breadth of entries in this particular challenge. There have been so many that have been absolute fun to read up on and write up for Hackaday. I'm very much looking forward to going through them all in detail because this has been a brilliant challenge. I love it.
Yeah, it was absolutely fun. And we got 89 submissions. Almost all of them are legit. We always get a few people who submit random crap and hope that it's going to fit. But this one got most of them. So I guess we probably have 80 really good entries in this one.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
But it's a contest so fitting with the Hackaday ethic that, of course, a lot of people submitted. But I'm still stoked to see that y'all did. So stay tuned. Next week, we will be revealing the winners for this one. Along with that, our honorable mentions and our favorites in all sorts of other dimensions as well. And thanks to DigiKey for giving us the 3 $150 gift certificates that we will be giving to the top 3 winners. And in other Hackaday universe news, they have found a complete UNIX v4 source code.
To be fair, they have found a tape marked complete UNIX v4 and they hope it contains the source code. This is a wonderful story. They're cleaning out an old storage room at the University of Utah and they find a reel-to-reel tape labeled something along the lines of UNIX version 4 C manual for details or encoding details, can't remember the exact text, which is tantalizing because apparently there are fragments of UNIX v4 surviving, but nobody has yet found a full version. This is from, I believe, somewhere in the middle of 1973. And if it were indeed correct and they can recover it, it would be quite a significant piece of computer history. Of course, they realise what they've got, or what they've potentially got, and they are getting it to the Computer History Museum in Mountain View. I think it's quite funny. They don't trust the US Postal Service with it. So one of their grad students is actually driving it to the Computer History Museum, which is an epic tale. I have to admit, yes, I'm not as young as I would like to think I am. I think I was still just about 2 years old when this UNIX version came out. So while it is UNIX and I'm familiar with UNIX, I am genuinely a noob when it comes to early UNIXs. And so I'm really looking forward to what the Computer History Museum find of it. They will presumably have an archival tape reader of some variety and load it into, I presume they'll load it in first of all, just examine what they've got text file wise, but I'm hoping they'll be able to load it into a PDP and compile it, and we'll actually see some of its secrets and we'll get a wonderful write-up from them, which I'm sure we'll cover on Hackaday. We've all dug through dusty storerooms of computer, let's not call it junk, let's call it pearls, gold waiting to be found of computer and technology stuff. And some of us have come away with awesome finds. I mean, my audio analyzer, my distortion analyzer from the early 70s actually came from just such a dusty pile of equipment. And I was absolutely stunned to find it. And even more stunned, they were happy to sell it for me, even knowing what it was. So never avoid the chance to dig through a dusty storeroom because you never know what you will find.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
This week is a Guess the Sound week. I have a brand new sound for Jenny and then for you all to guess at. The one hint I'll give you is this is a sound harvested on my trip to SuperCon last week.
Well, that sounds interesting. If I had to make a wild guess, I would say it was something along the lines of,
Oh my gosh.
and possibly.
Very good guess. I think that counts as a correct guess.
Is that the first time that a Hackaday staffer has actually guessed the sound?
No.
Oh,
People
okay.
get them all the time.
It's just me that's crap then.
I wonder what our record is. I should compile those figures and see, we should put up a scoreboard.
Of all my colleagues, I'd put my money on Al for that one for some reason.
Al does pretty well. I think more of it has to do with your feelings of pessimism or optimism. Like Al always says he never gets it, and yet he's gotten 3 or 4, I think.
I've never got one. I always come up with inventive things, but I've never got one.
Is that right? Is that right? Well,
I don't think I've ever guessed one. I've come close, but I've never actually put my finger on it.
well, this one is yours. Congratulations, Jenny.
Wow.
The actual strangest sound we heard at SuperCon was the night after we were out in a bar, and at about 2 a.m, there was this terrifying prehistoric squawking. And I looked up and Tom was with me, and Tom was like freaking out. What is that crazy noise? And some of the Pasadena locals are like, oh, there's a bunch of feral parrots that go around in flocks of 20 or 30. And it was the squawking of like 30 parrots simultaneously. It was absolutely terrifying.
Impressive.
If you don't know that birds are just leftover dinosaurs, it turns out they are. And in
Yes.
big packs like that, they actually sound like it.
Yeah, we have green-necked parakeets in London, which are similarly raucous.
Yeah, so imagine 20 or 30 of them flying low when you've got a good drink on. All right, well, congrats, Jenny, for getting the What's That Sound right. If you listeners have a guess, head on over to hackaday.com/podcast, scroll down to What's That Sound, find the form, fill it in with your handle and your best guess, and we'll see among the right answers who gets a lucky dice roll next week and wins a Hackaday podcast t-shirt. All right, let's do some hacks. I want to start off with camera capabilities. Unlocked from a mouse is a sweet little mouse sensor-based camera by Dicus. And we've seen this hack, oh gosh, going way back. I was trying to remember when the first time I saw this was, and started doing my Hackaday search. 2006 optical mouse-based scanner was coverage of a project by Sprite. And then we've seen it resurface a number of times. Again, maybe let's say 2016, there was a great one. DIY optical sensor breakout board makes DIY optical mouse, which has a GitHub attached to it to kind of show you how to use the code to drive these things. Because that's something that's kind of missing in Dicus's write-up. Although what's not missing is all sorts of interesting refinements and possibilities and just kind of inspiration for you to mess around with the little super low resolution, I guess it's 30 by 30 camera that lies inside each mouse. And the real trick here is that he's 3D printed a housing for it so he can attach a CCD lens to it and turn it into, instead of something like your mouse, which has a focal distance of kind of 1 millimeter, something that you can use across the room. The chip he uses here is an ADNS 3090, if you want to go look it up. And indeed, I did pull down the data sheet and I was checking it out. It has a couple different modes. It can do kind of normal mouse mode, where it is internally comparing one picture to the other and figuring out how far over it moved, right? Like that's how optical mice work. And this it does at a frame rate of like 2,400 to 9,600 frames per second. And so you might be thinking, oh, cool, can we get a super high speed camera out of this? And sadly, it looks like the answer is no. If you dig into it and you look down to the downloading pictures mode, it looks like it takes about 10 milliseconds per image. So it's a 900 byte image. 10 milliseconds plus some overhead, and Dicus estimates it runs at about 90 hertz, and that all checks out. But that's still not a bad frame rate for a cheesy little camera. And he does demonstrate all the kind of other things that it can do. So for instance, he has a program that stitches together a bunch of panoramas as he sweeps it across the scene, and one that takes 4 different shots and just kind of puts them together. It doesn't really do the stitching, but if you frame it just right, you can kind of get a bigger picture out of it that way. That's really cute. And then, of course, he does what the mouse does. He puts it in, mouse mode and has it draw on the screen. And that points out the kind of other use of a mouse sensor and a good lens like this is you can use it as kind of an optical flow sensor. So he points the camera around the room and it draws on the screen as if he were, mousing around, right? Except it's the camera's physical movement through, his room space that controls the mouse. And just between all of these little elaborations he makes on this kind of old hack, it really points out a bunch of the different possibilities. It just really made me want to play around with the mouse sensor. And that's why I wanted to cover this one. On one hand, it's simple, but on the other, he thinks up 3 or 4 cool applications, all of which are just like teasers of something you could do with it as well. And the interface is dead simple. It's SPI. If you go looking for a schematic for this, there isn't one. It's just, quote, just cobble stuff together with whatever parts I have and design the case around it, he says, was his design technique here. It's a teensy and this mouse sensor unit. That's really all there is. And then, a battery and a screen and some buttons. Of the brains, it's really just a microcontroller and the sensor, and he's just pulling the data down over the SPI lines. So, very, very accessible, very, very cool. Pair it up with a real lens, and you've got a mouse that works in the real world instead of on your desk, or a crazy low-res camera, or. Take that where you may.
It's certainly great to see that there's life in such an old hack. I probably first saw these kind of projects, over 20 years ago, probably before Hackaday was a thing. It's nice to see somebody coming back and doing the same thing with much more recent mouse sensors and coming up with new twists on the old idea. I love this.
I just wish there were a way to get the super high speed video out of it. That would be really groundbreakingly different. And I wonder if there's room to look at a bunch of the different mouse brain chips and see if there is one that, that you can clock the SPI faster and see if you can get the images off a little bit quicker. That would be really, really, really cool.
I'm sure people will give it a try.
Yeah, but if you haven't hacked around with the mouse sensor, this is your invitation. Go do it.
The one that caught my eye was from, now let me read this, GigaWipf, GIGAWIPF. I get the difficult to pronounce nickname. And it's another camera, and it's another very similar in some ways camera to the mouse camera. It's at the opposite end of the resolution spectrum. What somebody has done has made a 3 gigapixel camera. And how they've done it, of course, isn't too much of a surprise. They've got the guts of a flatbed scanner in there. They've reverse engineered the protocol used by the linear CCD sensor. They've used a Raspberry Pi to read that. They've made a custom linear scanning rig. They've added a normal Raspberry Pi 5 megapixel or 12 megapixel or whatever it is camera as a sort of viewfinder alongside it. And they've made an actual standalone 3 gigapixel medium format camera. I suspect it suffers from some of the same issues that scanner cameras do, that they take a little while to take the picture. But it's a world away from simply sticking a scanner on the back of a camera. That's actually quite easy to do. I mean, I've experimented with it myself in the past. One of the best lenses to use is something like a projector lens. But you are effectively running the scanner as a scanner through USB or whatever with its own driver from your laptop or whatever. Whereas this is a standalone camera. And even though it's at completely the opposite end of the resolution spectrum from the mouse camera, oddly, the person making it has done very much the same thing and completely reverse engineered an unusual sensor to do something it shouldn't do. In a way, neither of these were entries in the component abuse challenge, but they both should have been.
What I love about this one is his kind of smart approach to doing the hacking. Like those CCD sensors, on one hand, they're brutally simple. You just throw a clock at them and you read the voltage that comes off. They have a bucket brigade thing and it steps the voltage from each pixel down the line and you read them as they fall off the end. The problem there is it means you need a really high-speed ADC. And so he just sidesteps all of this by ripping that part out of the scanner and figuring out how to interface with the onboard high-speed ADC and step-producing driver and all that mess. You know, in short, scanners have all that goodness in them. Why not use it? And that kind of smart hacking is definitely the way to go with these kind of devices.
I particularly like that a 3 gigapixel image has so much data in the RAW that it's way too big to be able to do at any speed on the SD card on the Pi. So it's actually got an SSD fitted purely for that purpose. And I quite like that. It's taking imaging to a next level.
Yeah, and this is the point where you need really, really good lenses to go with it.
Yeah.
He actually does a comparison of two shots, one with the wider angle lens that has got some chromatic aberration and stuff when you really dive in like this, and then another that it seems a lot clearer. There's the speed issue, but it could make really awesome images. The other thing I really loved about this one is that he freezes the sensor. So normally, you know, it scans, but he also has a mode where it freezes the sensor and then he can move across it. And so that gives you either the kind of line scan effect, or, you know, he moves his hand slowly. And so you get the horses crossing the finish line racing camera effect as well. There's a whole bunch you could do, like the way they did the visuals in 2001 Space Odyssey for like the time tunnel thing was a slit scan thing. You could do slit scan stuff with this. There are a whole bunch of crazy things you could do with such an awesome scanner camera. Makes me think. Well, next up from me, a video by Julesy, Morse Code for China. This is a really neat story about, well, Chinese Morse code. And it's super easy for languages that spell things out with letters to use Morse code. But imagine instead of single letters, you had, you know, between 10 and 50,000 individual characters that each one meant a word that you wanted to get across. How would you do it? And the story is long and convoluted and involves a bunch of politics, and I think is kind of interesting. I bring it up for the Hackaday context because it ends up being very similar and kind of parallel to the way that computer text with the advent of the World Wide Web had to be expanded out to multiple languages, certainly more than, you know, ASCII was designed for. And so I think that's really neat to look at both of these in comparison. The telegraph version of the story, you know, way predates computers. A lot of the Western countries have this telegraph system. They form the International Telegraph Union. And the question is then, how are we going to make Chinese characters work in the international telegraph system where they've already settled on the Morse code as the system to send letters across? And even that, of course, is more interesting than you think, because after Morse code was developed in America, when the ITU became the International Telegraph Union, it incorporated countries like France and Germany and other countries with mostly the same alphabet, but a bunch of funny other characters. And so there was apparently some wheeling and dealing to see, you know, whether the E with the accents on it would get shorter codes than the German double S, you know, the strong S, or an O with an umlaut. And, you know, a bunch of backroom deals there. China was not privy to any of this until fairly late in the game. When they devised their Morse code system, it is on one side just kind of brutally horrible, and on the other, the best you could imagine doing. They just picked the 10,000 most frequently used characters and assigned them numerical codes. So 4-digit numerical codes. Each character gets a code. And so you can't memorize Chinese Morse code because I say 4,703 and you have no idea which character this corresponds to. But they did have a code book, and you could look it up and send telegraphs back and forth using this. The trick at the time was that this meant sending a lot more characters, and telegrams were paid for by the character because each Chinese character was 4 digits. And so then that was, 4 characters each for them. And so, and the numbers unfortunately got these 5 code long strings, right? It's either dit, 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 da, dit, 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 da, dit, how the numbers go. The numbers are longer than any of the normal letters. So sending Chinese ended up being even longer than it could have been. Things got even worse when they invented a system to record telegraph messages and then play them back later. This was called deferred messaging. But as a precondition of using this service, you couldn't use a whole bunch of abbreviations because they wanted you to pay more to use it. And one of the abbreviations you couldn't use was numeric codes for things. And so the whole Chinese system ran afoul of this. And it was, I think, the 1940s by the time that they finally got all of this straightened out. And the Chinese joined the ITU and put forth a strong presence and kind of argued that their language was on bad footing with the way all of the price structure was written. Anyway, by the kind of 60s to 80s, telegraphs in China were a normal thing, and people were actually using this, giant code book to look things up. And it wasn't until kind of the fax and modern computer era that telegraphs, kind of faded out. And I know here in Germany, we could send telegraphs until something like 5 years ago. It was very recently, and it was a news story. People were sending their last nostalgic telegraphs from the post office. And the same thing happened in China back in the late 90s or early 2000s. I can't remember, she says in the video. And of course, all of this predates the UTF-8 revolution, which then opened the floodgates to all sorts of languages on the internet and gave us the world we have today, which makes a whole lot more sense.
In a previous life, I worked for an academic publisher, and one of their products was a Chinese dictionary. I'm not a Chinese expert, but I do remember that they adopted an approach of cataloguing the Chinese characters by radical, which I believe that relates to the brushstroke that would have been originally used to create the character. And from that, you can build up a sort of hierarchy of Chinese characters. And this immediately ties into a piece that we covered earlier in the month about the Ming Kuai, which was the first practical Chinese keyboard-based typewriter, which was invented by a Chinese-American guy in the 1940s, I believe. They had just found the lost prototype, which will obviously be subject to study. But that typewriter used a similar system of grouping by radical. And then once you got the radical, you had a much smaller number of potential characters to go with. I'm sure that there would have been telegraph operator savants who would have got to know up to 10,000 characters. I mean, there are certainly people who can memorize vast numbers of things from catalogues and things like that. A friend of mine worked for a British catalogue shop after university back in the 90s, and his party trick was you could fire him a number from the catalogue and he would tell you what it was. And so I'm sure there would be people who would master an enormous number of those 10,000 characters just through repetitive use, but it can't have been easy.
Most Chinese characters are made up of 2 parts. There's a radical part and a phonetic part. And the radicals have something to do with the meaning of it. And so there's a gold one, and that goes with all the metals. There's a hand, and that goes with a lot of things that have to do with verbs of moving things or pushing things around. First, they do the radicals by number of strokes in them, and they assign them a bunch of numbers. And then they do the characters by number of strokes in them. But that still means that, the code for llama is right next to the code for grandmother. And what? So it doesn't help. But I bet you're right. I bet that some people, especially for the commonly used characters, would probably end up memorizing them. And you'd end up with people who could go 4223, 3736.
But given that the Chinese involved themselves in the ITU in the 1940s, this is at the same time as they created the pinyin transliteration system for transliterating Chinese text into Latin characters, which might, you think, completely solve it. But, of course, as anybody's looked at Pinyin written down, there are an enormous number of diacritics, accents, because obviously Chinese being a tonal language, if you try to say it as I, as an Anglophone, would say, just say the letters, you're going to get it hopelessly wrong. Did they ever attempt to encode Pinyin with the diacritics into Morse, or did they just not try?
So the video actually ends with this, and Julesy doesn't know the answer, but she speculates that the reason nobody's ever done it with Pinyin is that Pinyin isn't one-to-one. Even once you do the diacriticals, there's still like a bunch of homonyms. If you think about it, they have like 50 sounds like most of our languages do, and then times maybe 4 different accents. So that gives you maybe 200 possible sounds, but then you have 10,000, individual words. And so there's quite a lot of overlap there. And her thoughts here are that doing it in Pinyin isn't sufficient to make the message come across unambiguously. And in the modern computer era, you can do a Pinyin typing entry method, but then it usually springs up a row at the bottom of the screen where it's like, these are the 10 characters that match the sounds you've typed. Pick the one that corresponds to the meaning you mean. But of course, to do it in Telegraph, you'd have to do that in reverse. You'd have to know which meaning goes with the sounds. My guess is it would work a lot of the time, but it's not foolproof. And that's why they stuck with this other system that, even though maybe more cumbersome, is at least exact.
That makes absolute sense.
The funny thing is, of course, now when you write Chinese, it gets translated into UTF-8, which again is just numbers put in funny order that correspond each one to the symbols. But because we have a computer standing in between doing the translation for us, instead of some person looking at this horrible dictionary of, numerical codes, it makes everything a lot easier.
Our next hack comes from Hero Tech and is probably the best lightsaber that I think any of us have ever seen. I think people have been making lightsabers ever since the 1970s when the first Star Wars film came out. Over the years, we've seen ones with collapsible cones that come out with a light, or we've seen... There was a memorable one that I think used a laser and some kind of fog generator. There have been ones with flames and everything. But this is probably the closest we've ever seen to something that looks like what is on the screen. It uses a thing called a magician's cane, which is like a tightly coiled up spring which expands lengthways into a long tube. Apparently you can get them with metal, but this particular one is opaque plastic. In the hilt, they've used a screen replica hilt. They've put the motorized system to extend and retract the cane. It has a row of addressable LEDs that go at the middle of it. The whole thing is designed to operate perfectly just like it would if you were a Jedi on the screen. But if you take a magician's cane and stick some LEDs into it and extend it, it looks great, but it sort of droops a little. And the droop is actually the most difficult part of this to deal with. And the way they dealt with it was to spin the magician's cane. It actually spins, which sort of spin stabilizes it. The result is a brilliant, shimmering lightsaber that extends just like the one in the film and retracts just like the one in the film. If that hack wasn't enough, just making a lightsaber like that wasn't enough, the thing that takes it to the absolute next level is the way that they miniaturize all of the mechanism required. There's several motors and a whole load of sets of gears and a load of gear procedures to make it all happen. They have miniaturized that down into the screen replica hilt. Obviously, when they designed the hilt for the screen, they were just doing it for looks rather than mechanism, and it probably isn't the best thing to start with. But these guys have succeeded in miniaturizing all the mechanism for their magician's cane lightsaber into a screen replica hilt, and it looks amazing.
We've seen this one before. This is kind of the newest, most refined version of it. I loved his earliest prototype where he was still messing around with different ways to get it to extend out. And he used like one of those retractable tape measures. And he did that in the first take on this one. That didn't make it. This is a much better version.
I don't think I've ever seen a lightsaber that looks as much like the real thing as this one. Because, of course, they are real, you know.
Well, none of them look like the real thing. I guess the real thing is a stick with retroreflective tape on it and a lot of work in post.
Probably, yes.
I think this looks more real than the real thing. Well, from a tool from a more civilized age to a tool we all use, this is Cheap Multimeter Gets Webified. A nice hack by Mellow Labs. They bought a multimeter that used Bluetooth, but then the Bluetooth is tied to a proprietary app, and that's no fun. And the question is, what can be done about this? The first steps in this hacking odyssey are to play around with the Bluetooth side of things, and Mellow actually ends up writing an app that can intercept the Bluetooth and listen to it and log it on the phone. And that's pretty cool. But what Mellow really wanted was something over Wi-Fi. And to do that, Mellow actually gets in between the logic of the multimeter and the Bluetooth chip it's using, listens to that protocol, sends that over to an ESP32 that's running a simple web page on it and graphing the data. And that's the basic overview of the project. Of course, there are a bunch of little tricks along the way, like for whatever reason, the meter XORs the data with a magic code so that you can't sniff on the Bluetooth until you figure this trick out, which Mellow did. And then the other trick, of course, is getting an ESP32 to run on batteries and making sure that the voltage levels are right for doing all that. So there's a little step up in there. Some clever wiring, a lot of reverse engineering. This was Mellow's excuse to buy a logic analyzer and dig into that world, which is a great thing to do. It just opens up, all sorts of internal data sniffing if you're into that sort of thing. So, glad to see that happen. But in the end, it's a sweet little hackable website on the ESP32. Fires up pretty close to instantly. You turn the meter on, it fires up a website. You can then connect to it with whatever you want with your phone. I like that it makes this a logging tool and it makes it a graphing tool and it does all of that automatically. Of course, once you have this going, you're in control of the code running on the ESP32, so you can have it do whatever you want. Send that data off to, your house MQTT network and handle it with other computers. Log it somewhere else. Who knows what? This is kind of the first step in making it even more open to, fit into whatever data logging setup you've got. So I really like that. Makes me think I really need to hack around on some of my meters. I am such a caveman. I just look at the numbers on the screen.
Certainly any excuse that you can find to buy new test equipment is always a good idea, as is any hack that removes the need for some horrible proprietary app. I like this.
Agreed. It's surprising how affordable a lot of the Bluetooth-enabled logging multimeter tools are these days. It makes me think I really should get one and look at it.
I probably should too.
Yeah, a lot of them are supported by SIGROC too. So if you want to take the data and put it straight into your computer, not interested in doing a hack like this, you can do that as well.
The funny thing is, there's been a convergence of test equipment, much analogous to, say, the convergence of everything, all the electronics you own into a mobile phone, in that I have a Rigol oscilloscope, probably the same one that many other Hackaday readers have, and it is genuinely the test equipment that replaces all other test equipment. It's a frequency meter, it's an oscilloscope, it's a voltmeter. It can do, it can also analyze protocols. It can do all sorts of tricks, which I would have needed a whole test bench for before. And I find myself using my multimeter less and less and less just because the scope does it for me. In a sense, I already have a multimeter that will log absolutely everything I want it to.
Right? Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, just put it in slow running mode
Yeah.
and let it go, right?
But it will tell me the voltage, it will tell me the RMS voltage, it will take me the peak voltage, it will tell me whatever it is I want it to tell me, and it's better than a multimeter.
Except it's less portable.
It's true.
So much easier
That
to
is
take a
true.
multimeter down to the basement.
That is true. On my bench, it's fine, but yes.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Logging multimeter is great when I don't know, you want to do a solar project and you need to do it out on the patio.
That is true.
Or, you need to do some work with the car or et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's always, like you said, there's always a time for more tools and more measuring equipment. Each and every one has its place in my heart.
To be honest, I have a big rack of test equipment above my bench, a lot of which I don't really use that often now, but it's because it looks impressive to have a big rack of test equipment.
No excuse necessary.
Now we have a hack from you, which is a lighting effect. It's a very simple LED projector, but behind the simplicity lies some quite interesting work, which is worth a second look. What they've got is an array of addressable LEDs. I believe this is available as an off-the-shelf component. And in front of it, they've stuck a lens system to project those LEDs onto the wall, which makes a really cool low-resolution screen. You could use it for patterns or even very low. You could probably use it for the image that would come from your mouse camera if you had one. But it's basically a lighting effect. But the interesting thing is, how do you project a load of addressable LEDs onto a wall? And this is one of those projects from a hackerspace, and they said they had a bit of a brainstorming at the space, and people suggested a Fresnel lens or a load of individual lenses in front of the LEDs. And they tried both, and in the end they came up with a combination of both. The Fresnel lens would focus the LEDs very well, but if you look carefully, if you've ever taken a look at an addressable LED, it's not an LED, it's actually three little LEDs on a substrate. And of course, it would focus exactly what it saw. And so you got three little points of light, and you didn't get your nice blob of light, which is what you actually want from this kind of projector. So they actually made a two-element lens system, which was a SLA printed in clear resin, a block of individual lenses to go over the LEDs, and in front of that was the Fresnel lens for the final focusing. And the idea was that it effectively spread out the light, defocused it from the LEDs, and then the Fresnel lens could focus that blob of light, and it works very, very well. There's a lot of interesting stuff about printing optically clear lenses with an SLA printer. Now, this isn't optically clear in an astronomical sense. This is optically clear in a 3D printing sense. So it's not a perfect lens, but it's good enough for the job in hand. I found it to be an interesting write-up. I like the effect. I would love to have a projectable LED matrix, but I found the discussion of creating your own optical systems for that to be very interesting and worth the read. I'm probably not going to build one myself, but I found it an interesting and compelling write-up to read.
Yeah, that's a really cool trick. The lenses that come out of the resin printer, they're not perfect, but of course they don't need to be here, right? In fact, their kind of imperfectness
Yes.
is part of what they're going for. It does some of the color mixing, and it makes this absolutely fantastic effect. They're focused enough that they hold the pixels together as kind of rounded edge squares, basically, but not perfect enough that you can see the individual elements. So, like, in short, it's exactly perfect. So pretty darn cool. And then combining that with the second Fresnel lens makes it into, I guess it makes it into some kind of a telescope or something, so you can focus it on nicely on the wall. We didn't embed the video for this, but it's over on their printables webpage, or at least it's an animated GIF. You should absolutely watch it. Gets the idea across about, the possibilities of what you could do with this even better. First up from me, RP2040 from scratch, roll your own dev board, is a great write-up of a project by Kai to essentially recreate the Pi Pico dev board from scratch in KiCad. And I think that's what's really nice about this. It's an absolutely brilliant, detailed walkthrough of how you would use KiCad to make a modern high-density circuit board complete with SPI memory and one of these bare chips, through generating the bill of materials and the outputs you need to get it fabbed, getting it fabbed, soldering it all together. If you haven't caught up with the modern PCB generation workflow, this is a fantastic write-up, even if you don't want to make your own dev boards. Vimpo running a Minecraft server on a Wi-Fi light bulb. Yes, this is what we have come to. This is kind of a cool stunt hack. Vimpo had actually been working on a tiny little Minecraft server before and discovered that it could run, among other things, on one of these programmable lights. It's pretty fun. It's a stripped down version of Minecraft, but there's a demo of 3 people playing on the server in the light bulb simultaneously. Cody Kosiemba, Nest thermostat, now 100% less evil. This is a compilation of a bunch of other people's work to make a kind of turnkey new firmware for Nest thermostats. Doesn't rely on the Google network anymore, makes it run entirely on your own terms. Included is a server that Cody stood up, and of course it got immediately /dotted /Hackaday affected and got taken down. But no worries, you can also run it at home. That's up on his GitHub. Bringing up the rear, HTX Studio, testing whether fast charging kills smartphone batteries and other myths, is a long-running project to put smartphones through charge and discharge cycles. What I really loved about this was the test rig, which contained an app on the phone that could tell battery status charge. It would then wirelessly turn on a relay that would charge the phone back up. So it could get it down to 10%, charge it back up to 100%, get it down to 30%, charge it up to 80%, test various charging regimes. And it even had a little light sensor, I think it was a color sensor, that he would press against the screen and it could tell if the app was actually running or not and reboot the phone in the case that it crashed, which was important because these phones had to run unsupervised for 6 months for the duration of the test. Short version is fast charging, slow charging doesn't matter, but charging your phone between the kind of 30 and 80% mark, i.e. not fully, does tend to make lithium-ion batteries last longer.
For my quick hacks, I've decided to highlight a few from the Component Abuse Challenge. It's quite a difficult thing when you've got so many to choose from, so there's a fairly random selection, but it should give you an idea of the quality of the entries we've been receiving. First up is Ian Dunn with an LED tester. That mere description alone doesn't do justice to what it is. He's taken a hot dog. He's applied the mains at each end of it, which I believe is a time-honoured way to cook hot dogs. I believe there have been commercial hot dog cookers that do that. So he's applied the mains at each end of it, and that forms a crude potential divider. So if you take an LED and stick it pins into the hot dog, it has roughly around the right amount of voltage across it to light up. And here's this wonderful picture of a hot dog in a bun with all the condiments, with a whole load of LEDs of all colours stuck into it, all lit up, and I loved it. Next up is Hun. They lit up a neon bulb using only a 9-volt battery and a relay. Now, what they've done is they've made the guts of a boost converter. If you know how boost converter works, you take an inductor, you energize it across a low voltage, you disconnect the low voltage, all that magnetic field you've stored up collapses all of a sudden and you get a great big spike of voltage coming out. And with the boost converter, you harvest it with a diode into a capacitor, and you usually have some little controller chip that controls the length of the pulses going into the inductor, and you can step up voltage and regulate it and stuff. This is a very crude version of the same thing. You set a relay to be a buzzer, and every time the contacts disconnect, there's a great spike of voltage. If you just left it as a buzzer, you'd see little sparks everywhere around the terminals, and the terminals will probably eventually die. But what they've done is they've taken a neon bulb, and that spike of voltage goes into lighting the neon bulb. So if you want to light a neon bulb from a 9-volt battery, and you don't have any semiconductor components, active components, but you've got a relay, now you know how to do it. And the final component abuse one came from Luke J. Barker. They needed a slip ring for a project, not some high revolution, high power slip ring as you'd find in a motor, just a fairly simple thing that had to rotate around. And rather than buy one off the shelf or try to make one, they looked in their parts bin and found a 1/4-inch jack. And that's brilliant component abuse. There's no way a 1/4-inch jack is intended to do that. But of course, if you think about it, 1/4-inch jacks have their original use in the telephone business, where they did have to take quite a punishment, and so they're stronger than you think if you get a decent quality one. So they're using a 1/4-inch jack as a simple slip ring, and it seems to be doing the job. I quite liked that. Final quick hack isn't a component abuse challenge. It's a handheld Raspberry Pi cyberdeck called the Bumbleberry Pi. It's a very nicely executed one. It's all-in-one handheld flat slab, so a keyboard and screen. And in particular, they're thinking about it as relating to the likes of the Clockwork Pi U console. What I like about this is that this is a handheld cyberdeck that will actually work and it will have supported software. It's a problem with so many of these type of devices that the software never really lives up to the hardware. And this one looks like it will live up to the hardware. I like that. So that was my quick hacks.
Well, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week I'm picking Tom Nardi's "If iRobot Fails, Hackers Are Ready to Wrangle Roombas." The news this week is that the company behind the Roomba, iRobot, is looking like they may be going bankrupt. Tom came up with this piece of news just the other night, said, "Oh my God, what is this going to do to the Roombas? I want to go have a look at it." And so off he goes into the forest of open source software to see what's available to save us and what's necessary. And this actually looks just fine from both a consumer perspective and from a hacker perspective. A lot of the Roombas are freestanding for most of their use, but then need to connect to the web for kind of fancier programming. So if you want to have it run a particular fancy schedule, or if you want to have it do rooms in a particular order or particular crosshatch patterns in a room or whatever, there are things that you need to connect to the web for. And if iRobot does go bankrupt and completely cease to exist, then you will have to be on your own to make sure it can still do this. The good news is people have already got kind of open source equivalents for a lot of these different programs. Most of those were just to add extra features that people wanted, or to make it simpler to use, or to make the scheduling easier, etc., etc. The usual hacker reasons, right? Like you have an itch, you want to scratch it. So the good news is a lot of the backup for iRobot disappearing entirely is already out there. The other thing that's great, the earlier series Roomba robots all had a little sticker on the top that if you removed it, exposed a port that you could attach to. And that was like part of the reason that they were so hackable in the first place. It's got a hacking port on the top. So if you have one of these nice old ones, of course, there's nothing stopping you from putting your own microcontroller brain in the thing and then connecting it to your house network however you want. I guess I said that things were going to be okay for normal people, but this all does involve kind of running a local server in your house, or, opening up the robot port on the top and plugging some hardware into it. Until people come up with kind of simpler turnkey solutions for all of this, it is going to make using a Roomba less convenient for some percentage of the non-hacker population out there. And that is the way Tom ends the article, with the happiest of all possible notes. Maybe this will mean lots and lots of Roombas showing up on the second-hand market for dirt cheap, ripe for the hacking. So if you have been waiting to get one of these small, round, 2-motor, fairly capable, nice battery robot chassis, iRoomba going bankrupt may have a silver lining for folks like us.
This is probably very wrong of me. Many Hackaday readers will not necessarily know the struggle that we writers go through every now and then when we think of a wildly inappropriate but very funny title for a piece. And I would have been so tempted to say, "Spread your cat poop the open source way."
Yeah, right? We had to get new art for this one because the last time we ran a Roomba article was actually the poop detectors. And the Joachim art we have for that is a Roomba fighting with the poop emoji and winning. And I was like, that's just not quite the right message for this one. So actually have a look at the one he did. It's really clever. It's the stocks go down kind of thing, but with a Roomba vacuuming its way to the end of the line. It's actually pretty subtle.
Oh, cool. As always. Yeah.
Kudos, Joe. My gosh. When artists do their art, it is so nice.
It's a perk of working for Hackaday is getting Joe doing art for your stories.
But I don't want to take too snarky a take on this. If Roomba/iRobot is going out of business, it is kind of a bummer because, like I said, they did make these things open and easy for us to hack on way back in the day, and just out of the kindness of their own hearts. When you peeled that sticker off, it actually said, "This robot contains an electronic and software interface that allows you to control or modify the behavior, remotely monitor its sensors. For software programmers interested in giving your iRobot new functionality, we encourage you to do so." So like the exact opposite of the warranty void if removed sticker. And they may have also been hoping for a kind of an aftermarket brain ecosystem to develop for them. I don't know what their strategy there was. But anyway, I know that our hackerspace early on in the Roomba thing was building a robot based on top of these.
Meanwhile, by comparison, my hackerspace has, I believe it's a Xiaomi Chinese one that runs Linux and is also hackable. It's all hooked into our... doesn't talk to its home server. Instead, it's all hooked into our home automation system and very much blown wide open. So it's not entirely as though all the other products aren't hackable.
Yeah, but not intentionally so.
Fair enough,
like
that's
Xiaomi
true.
wasn't throwing you a bone on that one.
No, they weren't. They weren't.
You know, so... I'll spill some beer for iRobot if they go out of business because they were trying to help us get the job done. Whereas Xiaomi was interested in reporting home and bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I know. My can't miss this week comes from our colleague Maya Posh, who has written an article about FreeBSD as an alternative to Linux for refugees from Windows. I get quite a lot of vibes from this article because, of course, I've done over quite a long time the Jenny's Daily Drivers series where I try random, usually quite esoteric operating systems as a change from my normal Linux desktop. And I try to do my job with them, hence Daily Drivers. I try to write a Hackaday piece. And in many cases, it's a operating system that's too esoteric and it doesn't work. But one of the ones I have tried in the past is FreeBSD. And I found it very, very usable, as you might expect, because it's a fully featured and modern operating system. She goes into detail about FreeBSD and how you can have the vanilla version of it where you have to, it dumps you into command line, you have to set up everything yourself, or there is what amounts to as close as FreeBSD gets to a distribution. There's GhostBSD, which obviously is more like the Linux distros you're kind of used to. A lot of things resonated for me though, because she talks about how she has problems booting from USB sticks because of weird incompatibilities between USB 3 and USB 2 and other sort of having to jump through hoops to set up an unusual operating system. And I totally feel the pain on that one because there would have been more Jenny's Daily Drivers. There are several operating systems which I have never managed to get to work on my hardware. The whole point of the Daily Drivers series is to do it on actual hardware rather than in a virtual machine. And I totally resonated with Maya's tribulations on that one. It's an interesting piece. it certainly showcases FreeBSD as a useful operating system that is a viable alternative to Linux. I hope that there are a cadre of Hackaday Reader FreeBSD enthusiasts who will be cheering at this point, and I want to hear from you in the comments.
Yeah, I want FreeBSD to be awesome too. I think one of the things that she comes to here and that a lot of people have found is that if you're using older hardware or hardware with weird peripherals, there just often isn't the support in FreeBSD that there is for it in Linux.
That is true.
That can be the killer. You know, if you're lucky and your hardware works with it, I think everything goes smoothly. And if you're unlucky and it doesn't, you may be better served with a Linux distribution. Yeah, certainly one of the more mainstream ones instead. I definitely think her argument about the Linux chaos vortex is overblown. You agree? Oh, I think that's good. We could talk about this.
Well, it gets very wearing. I mean, we make jokes about it. I use Arch, by the way. We make jokes about it, but it does get very annoying sticking your head above the parapet and getting, instead of people helping you, people telling you, oh, you should use this distro because you're using the wrong distro. And usually this distro is just whatever the flavor of the month is, and then they'll be recommending a different one in 5 minutes' time. A few years ago, I used Ubuntu for years and finally got annoyed with snaps enough to move to Manjaro. And I don't like moving my Linux distro over 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Oh, I hear you. And I use Arch, by the way. But no.
Well, Manjaro is Arch for cowards.
I agree that there are too many Linux distributions out there and choosing among them is maybe confusing or something. But the differences among them is also equally small, that the choice is probably not going to hurt you one way or the other. And especially in the context of coming from Windows looking for another operating system, none of them are all that different from each other. As different as any of the Linuxes are from Windows or from Mac OS for that matter. I don't know. Embrace the chaos, Maya. Come on. But I love that she went for something slightly off the beaten path, like a FreeBSD distro. And even if it's not about chaos, but just about, hey, I want to try this out, then, that's the way to go.
We must tempt her along to Hackaday Europe just so that we can have the pleasure of her saying, I use BSD, by the way.
We'll see if it works with any of our sound cards. We'll see if we can get a sound bite of her saying that or not.
I was pleasantly surprised my most recent daily driver was Reactos. And Reactos is a project I've been following for over 20 years. And I'm very pleased to say that finally it has reached the point where it is a daily driver. It was slow, but I wrote a Hackaday piece on it and I could actually use it.
Well, that wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. As always, you'll find the show notes over at hackaday.com/podcast, and we encourage you to send your best tips to tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
eat, sleep, hack, repeat. You realise I've lost all my tabs, and if I can't get back recently closed windows, I will cry. So it's... Oh, damn it. I cannot...
The chip he used, which one is it actually? Damn it. I gotta go look.
Well, we know that Hackaday readers love to speculate on things.
Oh no, now I've undone it and destroyed the link. Undo. No.
My credibility is just hit the floor.